sees the arrival of more than 400 happy Jamaicans. They've come to seek work in Britain and are ready and willing to do any kind of job that will help the motherland along the road to prosperity. They're all full of hope for the future, so let's make them very welcome as they begin their new life over here.
My people, in 1948, a German ship that became a British troop ship landed in Britain. It was called the HMT Empire Windrush, and it carried hundreds of passengers from the Caribbean. They came at the invitation of the British government to help rebuild the country after World War II. Nurses, rail workers, builders, men and women who laid the foundations of modern Britain. They were known as the Windrush Generation. They brought diverse skills, culture, and energy, significantly contributing to British life in sectors like healthcare, transport, the arts, and more. But decades later, many of their children and grandchildren faced something unthinkable. Because of hostile immigration policies, thousands who had lived, worked, and paid taxes in the UK for decades were suddenly told they had no right to be there. People were denied health care, jobs, housing, even deported, stripped of their dignity in a country that they helped build. The Windrush scandal came to light in 2018 when it was revealed that thousands of Caribbean migrants who had arrived legally in Britain between 1948 and 1971 to help rebuild the country were being wrongfully targeted by harsh immigration laws. With landing records destroyed and documentation lost, many were denied health care, jobs, and housing. Some were even detained or deported. The scandal sparked national outrage, forced an apology from the government, and exposed deep injustices at the heart of Britain's immigration system.
How much we value the contribution that has been made by Commonwealth citizens who've made their life here in the UK to the United Kingdom. I particularly want to acknowledge that as we come together and celebrate the Commonwealth and the ties between us and the connections between us at Chobham. And particularly the Windrush generation helped to build the country that we are today. And I want to dispel any impression that my government is in some sense clamping down on Commonwealth citizens, particularly those in the Caribbean who built a life here. I take this issue very seriously. The Home Secretary apologised to the House of Commons yesterday for any anxiety caused, and I want to apologise to you today.
The Windrush scandal wasn't just a bureaucratic failure. It was a betrayal. It exposed just how fragile citizenship, belonging, and justice can be, even for those who have given everything to a nation. While the scandal broke headlines in 2018, the fight for justice is far from over. So joining me today on the show are two individuals who are on the front lines of that fight. Anthony Brown, who is the second vice president and honorary chairman at Birthmark of Africa, co-founder of Windrush Pioneers and chairman of Preston Windrush Generation and Descendants UK, as well as Tonika Stephenson, co-founder of Liverpool Advocates for Windrush, an organization that is dedicated to supporting victims, demanding accountability, and making sure that history never repeats itself. Anthony and Tonika, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Sandra. It's our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sandra.
My pleasure. So I'm going to start with Anthony. You were a victim of the Windrush scandal. You witnessed this firsthand. So tell us about your experience, starting from how your family ended up in the UK and when you received the deportation order.
I was born in Jamaica when Jamaica was a colony of the United Kingdom. And so the family had the status of citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. My dad came over to the UK to study civil engineering on a scholarship. And then afterwards, he was literally helping to rebuild the country. He sent for my mother and myself and 4 siblings. And we came over in 1967 and went to school here, But then my dad decided to return to Jamaica in '73 to take up a contract at the College of Arts, Science and Technology in Jamaica. He wanted to put something back into Jamaica. And myself and my next older brother, Paul, went to Jamaica College. I didn't settle, and after 4 years, I decided I wanted to come back to the UK. So I came back age 17 and went to college again. After I did college, I wanted to go on to university, and the college told me that they were treating me as an overseas student. And I thought, oh, that's strange. They said, you need to write to the Home Office to clarify your status. So I did. I wrote to the Home Office, and the Home Office wrote back and told me that I was an illegal immigrant and that I needed to report to Manchester Airport for deportation. So that's when I found out that I'd fallen foul of the immigration laws.
Wow. So, I mean, what were your thoughts, right, when you received this message? What were you thinking? And in the bigger context of what was happening around that time, were you alone in this situation, or at this point, had you spoken and connected with people who were also dealing with a similar situation?
Well, my thoughts were that I was terrified because, as I say, I didn't settle in Jamaica. I'd spent 4 years pining to come back because I'd missed all my school friends. I'd come to the UK when I was 6, very young, so I'd developed affinities. And my brother was still here. Only two of us had gone back to Jamaica. My two sisters were here, and I thought that I was just rejoining my friends and family. But the government was telling me that I didn't belong. I was shocked and frightened, and I thought, I was going to be taken away, and I'd never see my loved ones again. We'd heard of other people being threatened with deportation, but they were usually from the Asian community. It was the first time I was hearing of anybody from the African Caribbean community being threatened with deportation. So it was quite a shock.
So I want to go deeper into the journey, right, of the Windrush generation and how they ended up in the UK. Tonika, what can you tell us about, this generation, and more specifically, why they came to the UK at the time that they did?
Sandra, that's a great question, and thank you for asking. Because only when you understand the roots can you understand how the trees and limbs and everything else will come into force. Back in the period of when we had World War II, which is around 1948, 1946 period, there were ships that were coming from Commonwealth nations, specifically in the Caribbean. So before the ship that we know as MV Empire Windrush ship that landed at Tilbury in 1948, there were two other ships that came to the UK from the Caribbean that aren't being spoken of. And one of them actually landed in Liverpool in 1947. I recently learned of this from a colleague at the International Civil Museum here in Liverpool. But nonetheless, during the period of the Second World War, England needed help from citizens of the United Kingdom colonies, they were called, at the introduction of the 1948 Nationality Act, because they were in ruin. The Germans had bombed several parts of England, and they needed skilled laborers to help them rebuild the motherland as we know it from the Caribbean, or just the United Kingdom, as it's coined today with 4 different countries forming the United Kingdom. Nonetheless, an invitation was put out to said Commonwealth nations. 1948 it became Commonwealth because certain former colonial nations started to gain their independence. They were asked, or rather invited, to come and help rebuild England. They took up the call, they took up the mantle, as we've seen images when people disembarked the ships at Tilbury for the purposes of Windrush, the Windrush ship. They were well suited and booted. They were skilled laborers, not, as we often hear, that people from Commonwealth nations were slaves or enslaved, and they
Yeah.
were, having tatty attire, for want of a better expression. No, these were skilled individuals. They were
And they
invited.
came they came voluntary, right?
Correct. They had to actually pay their own way.
Wow.
They were invited
Were there any rewards or benefits? Why did they go?
because the motherland called.
Hmm.
Because England declared she needed help to rebuild.
So it was just out of goodwill. We want to help England build.
I would like to think so.
There was a little bit more to it than that, because as I was saying, my dad's generation were, the ones that were coming. But in 1948, actually, the story goes a little bit further back in
Yeah,
that
before that.
during the war, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, Britain made a call to the Caribbean and the Commonwealth that they needed people to come and help fight the war. And people from the Caribbean came as they had come in the First World War to come and help Britain fight against Nazi Germany. And some of them even put their monies together and bought their own fighter aeroplane. It was as committed as that.
What?
Yeah, they're
Wow.
called pilots. They're called Pilots of the Caribbean, a play on Pirates of the Caribbean. But you can Google them and find out about their story. But they actually came and fought in the war. Some of them fought as in the Battle of Britain. Some of them fought as ground troops. But there were all these soldiers that came from the Caribbean, from India, from Africa, to defend the empire, to defend the mother country. And then after the war, they were demobilized. But then, as Tonika says, the place had been bombed to smithereens, and they decided, oh, well, we need these troops, but we need the manpower back. So the Empire Windrush was a German cruiser that had been captured by the British during the war, and they'd renamed it Windrush after a river in England called Windrush. And so they gave it the name Empire Windrush, and sent this ship to the Caribbean specifically to bring back these troops that had been sent back or that had been demobilized. So it was really bringing the troops back. And while they were there, the captain decided that he was going to sell tickets. The Caribbean was economically very impoverished at the time. They needed work. And so they answered the call as well to come and help rebuild. So those are a bit more details to the story. But really, everyone was asking the troops to come back and then ask people to come on board the ship. That was the Empire, and it was significant because when it landed, there was a film crew who filmed it. There was, Lord Kitchener, the famous Calypsonian, was on that ship. It had many skilled people, and so it became a kind of celebrity thing about this ship bringing Caribbean people over. But prior to that, as Tonika said, about other ships always coming and going. But this one was sort of marked a moment when people became aware of the wave of Caribbean people that was coming over to help rebuild after the war.
So going back to the 80s, right? When you personally became a victim of this scandal, to 2018, right? Which it seems like that's when everything kind of blew up, right? Can you tell me more about the impact over the years? How many people have been impacted by this, have been deported back to Jamaica, for example? What can you tell me about that?
So the scandal blew up in 2018, and the reason for it blowing up at the time, there was this important meeting in the UK, Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. So before we had the British Empire, Britain made all these different countries independent and created what they called a Commonwealth. And so it was supposed to be friendly relations and so on. And the Queen was the head of this Commonwealth group of nations. And they were all coming over to have this heads of government meeting. The Queen was going to be there. So it's pretty high profile. And then suddenly all these stories then started to come out about people being deported back to the Commonwealth. And people are asking the question, well, how could you be treating Commonwealth citizens like this?
Yeah.
After they'd come over and helped, and now they seem to be being surreptitiously deported, and nobody had taken notice that from my day, 40 years
from the
previously,
80s, right? Which is mad.
It had been going on quietly under the radar because after I was threatened, I kept my head down. I never went anywhere near the Home Office again asking about anything about citizenship or anything, because I'd learned my lesson the last time when I wrote what was going to happen the next time. So I just kept my head down. And what happened was that some of the high commissions, particularly the High Commissioner for St. Kitts and the High Commissioner for Barbados, which is unusual, came on national television and talked about these issues. And then the heads of government thought, oh, what's going on with our citizens? And this is when the Prime Minister then, Theresa May, decided that she was going to issue an apology. And she promised that she would rectify the situation by restoring the status of people that had been threatened with deportation. There were questions asked in Parliament. One of them was asked by David Lammy, who was recently the Foreign Secretary, but now he's been reshuffled. But anyway, he asked, how many people had been deported, and the Home Office said that 164 citizens, British citizens, had been deported. They were only able to check up until 2002. So before that, we don't know the numbers. But the numbers that Amber Rudd gave in Parliament was that 164 people who were actually British, so they were deporting their own citizens. And what had happened is that there was a lot of heightened tensions on immigration. And what the government was always talking about in Parliament was net migration, meaning you subtract the number of people who are leaving from the number of people who are coming in, and they wanted to see that figure in the hundreds of thousands. And so it made sense then for the Home Office to be rounding people up, to make people leave, so that that net figure would appear less than what it otherwise would have been. These are some of the dynamics that was going on at the time, and that they consider people from the Caribbean to be what they called low-hanging fruit, meaning they probably knew that they didn't have all their documents in place, and that
are you there,
they
Anthony?
could be then rounded up and put on a plane.
I think we lost him. So let me go to you, Tonika.
And deported.
Okay, I think
so the issue there is that the laws had changed over time. So as I said before, my dad came as a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. When Jamaica got its independence, people were cheering that, Jamaica's independent now, but they didn't realize that their
apologies to our viewers. We're having some technical difficulties.
Their citizenship status and becoming
Anthony, are you there?
Immigrants in their own country. And then
so let me get to you, Tonika, while we wait for Anthony to reconnect. So
to go to the doctors,
you co-founded Liverpool Advocates for Windrush to also join this fight, right? So tell us more about your story and how you got involved in the fight. Hi. Sorry, Anthony, we lost you for a second. So I'm gonna go to Tonika and then we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you. Ironically, in 2019, I met Anthony, and that's how I became involved. From 2019 to the scandal broke in 2018. At that time, I was still in the British Army and didn't really know much about it. I wasn't affected. None of my family members were affected. And 2019, come around early 2019, February, I was then doing my undergraduate law degree. And a friend told me about it. I'm like, okay, where do I sign up? How do I get involved? She introduced me to Anthony, and here I am many years later. So Anthony actually introduced me to it, introduced me to the struggles and plight of Commonwealth individuals, but more, as Anthony was saying, low-hanging fruit to carry on from where he left off. It seemed to affect more Black and brown people than anyone else. Given the fact that the Home Office current schemes says there are 65 Commonwealth countries affected, but EU nations or nationals are the most successful claimants to the schemes, and those individuals are not listed, their countries. So realistically, we don't know how many people are affected. But going back to answer the question, from how it was presented at that time around 2018, 2019, it was mostly Black and brown people who were being affected. Fast forward to 2020 when Brexit occurred, there were signs saying about Brexit, you need to get your status sorted, you need to get yourself settled because of these things that were going to be coming into force. None of that was in place when the scandal broke for those affected by poor immigration rules and or the things that affected them to date. Instead, it was, we don't want Blacks here, go home. Anti-racist rhetoric. I felt like I needed to do something, Sandra, so that's how I got involved.
Yeah, and what's your background, Tonika? Were you born in the UK, or what? What's your story?
No, I was born in Guyana. I am also from the
Guyana.
Caribbean.
Okay.
Yes, I came
When did you move to? Go for it. Great minds think alike. Yes.
I moved here when I was 20 years old, giving away my age now. And
hey, I can't tell because you still look like you're 20. So I don't know. Okay.
I joined the British Army, spent a decade there, and here I am many years later, a British Army veteran. I traveled a lot, seen several parts of the world, and I've had a similar experience as those affected by the Windrush scandal of not having a voice. I was in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, essentially a mechanic. So young Black female mechanic in a man's world, to put things into perspective. It was difficult, and I had to learn at pace. But I think it made me the person I am today. For several years, I have had the experience of not having a voice. But the camaraderie and teamwork I do miss, because that's what being in the military is all about. But being a minority, unfortunately, you can't get away from it, irrespective of the institution you're in, or you may find yourself in. Now I'm at a bar. Thank God it's much, much better at the bar, and I love my colleagues. And I miss my colleagues also in the military. There were some amazing people, so I'm just going to leave that one there, not to go too far down a rabbit hole. But the reason why I get involved, to answer your question, is because I did not feel as though I had a voice, nor my colleagues or brothers in arms. And now I do, and I would like to use it to help those who feel how we felt, in short.
Wow. So, I mean, what a great story. So Anthony, you mentioned that after your experience in the 80s, you kind of went under the radar, right? You didn't want to be a target anymore. You kind of went into hiding, or so to speak. So what made you come out? What made you decide that, no, it is time for me to actually not just be an advocate, but to be a champion, right, for this cause?
Well, prior to that, I call it a fugitive mentality because you're sort of not engaged with the authorities too much. But it came to me again. So as I was saying, the laws were changing and they were requiring documentation for you to access jobs and so on. And I got hit again in 2008 because I hadn't traveled for a while and my passport had expired and the laws had changed and they were saying that, if you needed if you applied for a job, you had to show your passport. And when I was changing jobs and I applied for this job, I got the job and then they said, "Could we see your passport?" And I was thinking, huh? This isn't the border. You only ask for your passport at the border. But, it took me, months to get it sorted and then I wasn't able to take up the job. And so I lost a lot of employment because of that. So I was hit again 30 odd years later. Now, that created difficulties for me. And then I was sort of thinking, what should I do now? And I thought, well, I didn't go to university when I'd wanted to. And I decided that I was going to study through the Open University. So I did the law course that I'd wanted to do when I was younger and then graduated in 2018, as a mature student. And then the Windrush scandal broke and I was thinking, here were these people on television who were being threatened with deportation, being, put in detention and losing their jobs and things that I'd sort of experienced. But now I had the legal skills to deal with it. So we went to these meetings and we talked in the community and I told them, I asked people in the community, we had these community meetings, and I asked people, had they been impacted by the mineral scandal? And nobody put their hands up. And so I told my story, what had happened to me. And then I asked again, and 6 people put their hands up. And I thought,
Wow.
well, I know you're a bit like me. You're staying under the radar. And so we sort of connected then, and we said, well, we're gonna work together. I'm gonna make sure that everybody gets their citizenship back. So I applied for myself, and within 3.5 weeks, after 35 years, they gave me my citizenship back. So they gave
Wow.
me my British citizenship back. So I started off a British citizen, and then they made me Jamaican, and then they made me British citizen again. And I hadn't done anything. So, it's just strange
Interesting.
how all these things kept on changing. I kept on changing. My identity kept on changing, and
Wow.
I didn't do anything for it to change. And so, we reached out to other people who I, knew had some legal skills. And then we became aware of Tonika as a law student, and we formed this team and called ourselves Windrush Defenders. And we started to help people in the community set up surgeries and just kept on working to help people with the paperwork. Because although the government had put a scheme in place so that people could get their status back, they didn't provide any support. So the communities kind of rallied around, or we rallied the community to help each other to get our status back. And we've just continued that work since then.
So, I mean, what is the real challenge, right? Is this a documentation problem, right? Because if you're a citizen, you should be able to prove with your passport or a piece of paper or whatever it is that you're a citizen. So help us understand, what has happened over the decades that have made it really difficult for, these people in the Caribbean to prove their, identity or their nationality.
It is based on
So it isn't really a documentation. They say it's a documentation problem, but we had this report released last September when the new government came into office. The previous government had been withholding it from the public. So they had done some research, and it's called The Historical Roots of the Windrush Scandal. And what it showed is that it's not a documentation problem we've got, it's a racism problem
Hmm.
because the report said that the laws of 1962, 1968, and 1971, which were immigration laws, were specifically designed, this is what the report says, to keep out black people out of the United Kingdom. We even have documentation released under the 30-year rule. So when the government has meetings and they have papers, they go into the archives, and then researchers can access them after 30 years. And so people went in and looked at the cabinet papers for that period, and they found that there were meetings where the cabinet was the British government's cabinet was talking about how they would design laws to keep out black and brown people. So it's a racism problem. The thing is that we still have those laws in place.
In place, yeah.
And so the Home Office and all institutions within the country have to enforce those laws. They have no choice. So if you haven't got your documents, you can't access the NHS. The NHS enforces that law, not the Home Office. If you go abroad and you haven't got the correct documents, you might have gone on holiday, or somebody might have died, and you've gone there to the funeral. When you're coming back, the airline will say to you, "Oh, you haven't got the right documents. Sorry, you can't come back." And people who've got their houses here, their families here, they're stuck wherever they've gone to for a holiday or whatever. So that's happened to many people. And so it's these laws that have changed. And, the government's brought in new laws that they call hostile environment laws, making it harder for anybody living in the country who isn't properly documented to access services. So, we've come up with ways in which, we can deal with that. But, I'll tell you about that in a little moment. But that is the situation that we're facing at the moment. It's a racism problem. It's not a documentary problem.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue. You brought up the perfect point there, that because I wanted to ask what are we doing about it, right? What are you all fighting for? Your organization, Tonika and Anthony, you've been doing a lot of work with your organization as well. So what does justice accountability look like, and what type of change, right, are you pushing for with your fight?
If I may go back to the question Anthony just answered, I thought it even started before then. See, I had the 1912 Aliens Act. Who are alien? What are aliens? That continued into First and Second World Wars, and then the 1948 Act. But going back to what Anthony said also, it's current pieces of legislation that were enforced then that has caused what we now know to be the hostile environment. In 2012, Theresa May says hostile environment, i.e. because they had too much immigrants, they wanted people to go back, so they implemented checks, such as e-share codes. Today, we have e-visas, everything being digital. So if you don't have an updated immigration status on a virtual document or a code that you can now access, no longer physical pieces of paper, then you can get in trouble because you don't have any proof to show your lawful status here in the UK. What are we fighting for? For just an equitable society, Sandra. But we can only do so much, because in my opinion, if the same pieces of legislation that caused the harm are still in force today, then how can we see the changes we're trying to? What are we striving for realistically? And the only institution within this country, or the countries that make up the United Kingdom, that can change that is Parliament. So we can fight against institutions such as the Home Office or any other arm of the state, but unless Parliament changes legislation, nothing changes. It's down to the interpretation or the intent of Parliament that these institutions are enforcing said laws. For example, landlords, they now have a mandate to check that you have a lawful status here in the UK before you can rent, such as employers, before you can work. And if you do not have a piece of paper, now a code to share, even though you may have been working for them for 15, 20, 30 years, you'll then either lose your home or lose your employment. So we are trying to educate people of this fact, but also encourage them to either register or support them to register for the e-share code, or just go through the schemes to rectify their immigration status first, then apply to the Windrush compensation scheme, because that's what is on offer at the moment, compensation, not restitution. And again, unfortunately, with the immigration issue that we find.
Tonika, I'm sorry. Can you tell us more about the Windrush compensation scheme? How does it? First of all, how was it established? Right? How did it come about? And what is the goal and objective here? And from both of you, is this working? Is this what we need, or do we need something more?
We need something more. I know it's not working, in my opinion. Going back to when I first answered the very first question here, it all started with legislation. So in 1948. The government over here created what is known as Commonwealth nations. So if you were a former colony of the United Kingdom and you gained your independence, at this time by 1948, 6 nations, including Australia and Canada, sought to have their independence. So they no longer were citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, or CUKC, they then became Commonwealth nations. So there's a difference and a differentiation between CUKC and Commonwealth nations and the rights those two titles confer on those countries. Moving forward, if you were settled here in the UK prior to 1971, then you would have been considered to have settled status, as Anthony explained earlier. If you left the common travel area, i.e. the UK, Isle of Man, Jersey, Ireland, Scotland, and you go say to France, which is within Europe, then you would have left the common travel area and you would have lost your right to remain. But if you came back within 2 years for Commonwealth nations, the differentiation with CUKCs, you can come back into the UK. The entry officer may let you in. However, if you're a European citizen, you had 5 years before your rights would have lapsed. In 2018, as you know, the Windrush Status Rectification Scheme came into force, stating that we have too many immigrants in the country, but we recognize that people who were here lawfully, i.e. Commonwealth nations or Windrush as it's coined, got caught up with the rhetoric that they too were immigrants and here unlawfully. So we need to rectify that in some way or another. Therefore, we're going to coin it Windrush Scheme. If you fall within these categories, or 4 categories at a time, then you will not be affected, or you should not be affected. Apply to the Home Office to get your status rectified. As Anthony explained, people would have been here for years and didn't think they need to get a document showing that they were British, but by birth, because they were already British when they came over, i.e. through being a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. Like, for example, today Bermuda is. Barbados, the king is still the head of state in Barbados. British Virgin Island and these other territories. You have dependent territories and crown dependencies. Cyprus, for example, or certain parts of Cyprus. I think there are 3 or 4 nations in Cyprus. But the point is, you were British, but by birth, i.e. just weren't born here within the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, that did not prevent people who fall within the Windrush generation and their descendants to be caught up in maybe the people who are fleeing persecution and harm, who we see coming over in small boats, maybe from France and wherever else. They all got caught up within the same rhetoric. If you're a certain skin tone, you were classed as an immigrant, irrespective of the fact you may have been born here. So going to 2019 then, the compensation scheme was introduced. Martin Ford Casey was commissioned to create said scheme. At the time, Anthony and I and rest of our colleagues in Manchester held a community meeting. Martin Ford consulted us and asked, do we think the current version or draft of the scheme was fit for purpose? The current draft at that time had enforced that the scheme will run for 3 years. Personal injury claims are for 3 years. If you sign a contract with someone, depending on the type of contract you sign, you may have a statute of limitation for 6 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. Now, this is a historic wrong. The then Home Secretary Amber Rudd in 2018 apologized for, saying that we need to right these wrongs. But yet, they were only offering compensation, not restitution. Restitution would have put you in the position you would have been in had the harm not been caused to you.
Right.
Compensation is to say, okay, I identify, I understand you've been hurt. Here you go. Here's a little thing. That's it. Only for 3 years you had to come forward to make a claim. But in doing so, you have to be both eligible and entitled. You could be eligible, but not entitled.
Interesting.
You
I mean, what does that even mean, right?
I love. Go ahead, Anthony. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to simplify because Tonika's given a lot of information, and some people can perceive it as very complicated. But you asked what was our campaign and what was the Windrush scheme. So the Windrush scheme is for anyone who came to the United Kingdom before the 31st of December 1988 and doesn't have documentation to prove that they have legal status. So remember the date, 31st of December 1988. From anywhere in the world, from Commonwealth countries, from America, which is not a Commonwealth country, you could have come from China, Italy. If you came here, because a lot of people after the war, like a lot of Italians, came here.
Got it.
They stayed here. They didn't have any documents. Didn't need any documents. So Britain, when they made all these countries independent, they didn't give us any documents to say that we had a legal right to be here. They just made a law that made a declaration that says you have indefinite leave to remain. So everybody has indefinite leave, but no documents to say.
To prove that. Yeah.
But then 50 years later, they say, okay, prove it. And he never gave us any documents. So just to simplify things then, the Windrush scheme gives people documents to prove their legal status if they came here before the 31st of December 1988. Now, depending on when you came, they may give you British citizenship. So if you came before 1973, like I did, then they are very nice to you and they say, here's your citizenship back, which is what they did with me. Other people, they may give them a letter just to confirm that they are a British citizen all along, because what you have is people who are born here, but are not considered British citizenship.
Right. And that was going to be my question is what happens to people who are born here, but whose parents came within that time frame and are not able to provide that documentation? I mean, that's anyway. Yeah.
Their lives get messed up like everybody else's. So like, for example, some of the clients that we've had, they were born after 1983. Their parents had come here, but nobody had told them to register them as British or anything like that. People just thought that they could carry on with their lives as you do. What happened was they wanted to go to university, and then when they were in university, they wanted to travel, and that's when they found out, and then their lives just fell apart. But then through the Windrush scheme, they were able to get a letter that said they were British all along. And then once they got that letter, they could then go and get themselves a British passport and, the lives get back on track. So that's one group of people. Even young people of 12 years old who want to go on their first school trip, they've been caught up and they're told they're not British. So it affects generations of people because of these changes in law. But the main thing is the scheme, the Windrush scheme, helps people to get a status letter which they can then use to go on and get a British passport if they want to travel. But their documentation then is settled by that. The compensation scheme says if you've had problems because you've been harmed, because you didn't have your documents. So like myself, because I couldn't get that job that I'd applied for, the government says, right, we'll compensate you for that. For the period you lost of employment, we'll pay you what you would have earned in that period. And similarly, people who have been working for 25 years and then they wanted to change their jobs, and their new employer said, well, where's your documentation? And you don't have it. They were out of work. They are also compensated, and they're compensated for the time that they've lost and also the stress and harm. So they're called primary claimants. But then they also have close relatives. So there's a second group of people who can claim, and those are the close relatives of the primary claimants. So that means like your wife or your child, or somebody who's been helping you as a close family while you were having problems. And third category of people are those people who had those problems but didn't have the time to make a claim before they died. So you've heard
Oh
that.
my God, that opens up, a whole other can of worms.
Some people have died before they could make a claim, and so they have another category called deceased person's estate. So your estate can make a claim to the compensation scheme. They will pay for the legal fees to sort of establish, who is legally entitled to make the application, and then that estate would get the compensation that would be paid. But then what happens once the money goes into the estate, then the estate has to distribute it according to
right.
The person's will, or according to
Tonika.
Thank you, Sandra. I just wanted to clarify some things Anthony said. You're no longer given British citizenship should you apply. You're given what's called a no time limit stamp, showing that, okay, you can go and come from the United Kingdom as much as you want. You then have to wait 12 months after having this no time limit stamp or vignette in your passport, which you're not doing anymore, before you can apply for British citizenship. However, it's been known to change depending on if you go to the vulnerable person team or directly to the task force or not. Sadly, the schemes get updated periodically without notice or warning. So at any time, if you're going to apply, you need to ensure you're using the latest and current version of either the status rectification scheme or the different forms of compensation scheme as Anthony just listed. Secondly, the schemes has clarified that there are 65 countries listed. However, if you're from the Commonwealth, you would have had to come before 1973. So 1948 to 1973, and from 1973 to 1988 is where the rest of the world comes in. I've recently had this discussion with senior Home Office ministers to query, because in the status rectification scheme, it says any other part of the world, excluding the 65 countries listed before. But the compensation scheme doesn't say that. So it's very nuanced, in short. Going back to the question. Sorry, Sandra, go ahead.
No, I just, before we go to that question, I just wanted to put this in some context for our viewers in America, and they may not be able to relate to this, but I just wanted to clarify that in Britain does not offer birthright citizenship, right, as here in the U.S. So they may not understand how important this is from the perspective of children who are now born in the UK to the Windrush generation who came to the UK. They're born there, but they're not recognized as citizens. So if they don't have the documentation to prove that their parents were citizens, right, that is what is creating all of this problem. So I just wanted to give that context for our viewers here.
Yeah, just to clarify that, Sandra.
Yes, please go for it.
So before 1983, Britain had a birthright law. So if you were born here, you were British. After
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
1983, the law changed. Even if you're born here, you're not British. And when these laws change, there's no big publicity campaigns, letter going out to people who it might affect. It
Hmm.
just changes, and and that's why so many people are caught out. But you asked, what was our campaign? So when we realised that people were caught up like this, and that it was because of racism, we kind of did some thinking and looked back in our history, and we felt, well, what did our ancestors do when they were faced with racism? And we saw that, before emancipation in 1833, Britain passed the Emancipation Act that freed all the slaves in the British Empire. What did our ancestors do? Well, they were burning down plantation houses and rebelling and causing these massive rebellions. And if Britain pressed them, they would rebel, and then Britain would change the law. But then we thought, well, we're not in the same position to raise an army and burn down Britain and cause havoc, but we can take the government to court because we now have those rights. And so what we did was we took the Home Office to court through what we call a judicial review. So we wanted a judge to review all the issues that we brought, because we were saying that the scheme was not fit for purpose. Some people were getting the status back and some were being denied. Some people weren't getting a compensation. Anyway, we didn't get permission for the judicial review, but the judge, bless his heart, still reviewed everything and gave us his judgment. And he gave us a 19-page judgment, and he said that really what we needed to do was go to Parliament, because the courts couldn't change primary legislation. And it showed that had the people who were impacted still had that status, that citizenship of the United Kingdom and colony status, then all the immigration laws that had been passed since then wouldn't apply to them. So that simplified it for us. So our campaign, we've called it Burning Work in honor of our ancestors. New form of burning work. We're not going to burn anywhere. We're just going to passionately persuade, our MPs that, to right this wrong, really, we need to amend the British Nationality Act so that certain pieces of, all the legislation to do with immigration does not now apply to myself or anybody of our generation, because the law, Parliament would have deemed us to be British. I mean, they've said that in their words, but they haven't put it into law. So what we're saying is, look, you've said it in your words, and we've got this big report that was done by somebody called Wendy Williams. She did what was called the Windrush Lessons Learned Review, and she made 30 recommendations. And recommendation 1 says that we are British. The Home Office has accepted that. Okay, well, if he's accepted that, put it into law. That's our argument, and that's our campaign. But we're saying also, you say in that recommendation that our community has been harmed. Well, how are you going to repair that harm? We've said, well, we have this scheme that we've called Burning Work, and it has 5 themes. It has community cohesion, because these immigration laws have damaged our community and we need to bring them back together again, and so we need to reform the law. But also it's created impacts in terms of criminal justice, in terms of health, in terms of education, and in terms of work. And you can see this harm in the figures. The government collects figures, and it calls it its race disparity audit. And so it compares how the African Caribbean community is doing in education compared to Asian, white, Chinese, and so on. And we're at the bottom of the league in all these different indicators. And so we're saying, in order to repair the harm, we want to see that these disparities are tackled by government institutions, but also by the communities. And we want some of that compensation to go towards organisations working towards tackling authorities. And we're calling that burning work, but it's governed by a Windrush Act, which we want to see Parliament pass into law. That's our campaign.
Got it. Tonika?
Thank you, Sandra. Just to add to something Anthony said, first and foremost, people who were born here and lived there all their lives, how were they affected? The audience may be thinking. Well, simple, because their foreparents' home countries, when they gained independence from British colonialism, they would have lost their right as citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies, which meant they were British but by birth. And having lost that, being over here, maybe when they came in 1948, 1950s or 60s, or whenever they subsequently arrived, be it by air, ship, boat, whichever means or mode of transportation, they would have lost it when their home country gained their independence. But they did not know that the change back home would have affected them here. They carry on their lives, lawful citizens, but yet they were met with hostility and discrimination as a result of both legislations here and back home.
Yeah.
In addition to the question you asked earlier, what changes must we see or do we need for real justice? I made some notes, and first and foremost is fund specialist legal advice. We've recently seen in the House of Lords by a law firm and Windrush activists. They did a study of 17 individuals who attempted to apply to the schemes without legal support. They may have gotten nil awards or really low awards. But when legal specialists intervened, their awards more than tripled. So, for example, from £20,000 to £150,000, £200,000.
That's a big difference. Yeah.
Precisely. So the first ask we think we need to see to secure real justice. I was thinking how best to phrase what it is I want to say, just for the benefit of the audience, is fund specialist legal advice. Not legal aid, but legal assistance. The second, shift the standard of proof to a trauma-informed balance of probabilities plus credibility. At the moment, is this current standard of proof is on the balance of probabilities, i.e. more than 50%. So we have clients who present to us credible cases based on the evidence they have, but yet it's been rejected or refused or denied by the Home Office. Bearing in mind, for the audience benefit, the Home Office administers the scheme, but unfortunately, it's also the Home Office which enforces the laws. So it's seen within the communities as the same institution that causes harm or perpetrated the harm are offering a remedy. I'll leave that alone. Going back to our ask, Sandra.
Yes.
Independent oversight with teeth. Perhaps powers. So we
Can you say that again, Tonika?
Independent oversight with teeth, perhaps even statutory powers. We've recently had a Windrush commissioner put in place. However, he does not have statutory powers. So again, how effective would his recommendations actually be? It's unclear, in my opinion, as a citizen of the UK. Who does he report to? Who?
Yeah.
Again, I'll speak for myself and our organization. The Windrush Commissioner should be given statutory powers to ensure that his recommendations and everything that he will be doing will be in the benefit of those affected by this horrible scandal.
Yeah.
Fourth, guarantee timelines and automatic interim payments. We advocated for 10,000 interim payment based on the merit or potential eligibility to the schemes, but that should be increased. Bearing in mind, this is a historic wrong that has been perpetrated for over 70 years. Over 5 generations affected. Not 1, not 2, not 3, 5. People are dying and they're not receiving any compensation. The next, proactive case finding. by the government, by the Home Office, for example, rather than waiting for people to navigate a complex scheme. Now, I'm a barrister, I'm legally trained, and it still takes me time to go through the schemes. My other colleagues who are solicitors and other barristers, they're trying to understand what the schemes are saying. I'm like, okay, what does this mean? It's meant to be simple, meant to be easy, but compared with other schemes that are administered by the Home Office today, for example, you have refugees coming to the country. You have schemes that the EU scheme when we left Brexit. You have the Ukrainian scheme, you have the Afghan scheme, the Hong Kong scheme. We've heard I haven't heard any complaints from those cohorts reference the schemes. We have other scandals, infected blood scandals, post office scandal. Again, why in comparison is the Windrush scandal being disproportionately administered than these other scandals and schemes? Again, is it racism? As Anthony pointed out earlier, is it discrimination? Is it merely because of the colors of people's skin, but they're British? We're unsure. I'm unsure. So in short, in order to see real justice, I believe, and our organization believes, that the schemes work when people have help and the rules bend to the evidence. It's very heavy evidential burden that's needed. So in order, going back to eligibility and entitlement, Sandra, in order for you to be entitled, you have to prove that your experiences were because you could not prove whatever it was because you did not have your legal documents to show. So if you could not find work, it's because you could not prove your lawful status.
So the burden of proof is on the citizens, when
Correct.
it should be the other way around, right?
Correct. But what's worse, it could be 70 years ago you've experienced this when Anthony in the 80s.
Yeah.
So you have to find evidence from the 80s. Who kept the receipt from the shopping last week?
Oof. Yeah, Anthony, you're off camera, by the way. So if you don't mind turning your camera back on, I would love to. So we're out of time, but before I go, just really quickly, in under a minute, if possible, how can members of the diaspora, right, and allies, right, how can they join you on this fight? What type of support do you need from the community?
So, as I was saying, we have a strategy called Burning Work, and we have 5 themes. Community cohesion, so that's to do with community hubs, and the work that used to take place in those hubs. So work to help young people around their education, their health, and so on. Then there's criminal justice. We want to prevent our young people going to prison. We call it the schools to prison pipeline. And there's lots of our young people being deported, being excluded from schools. We also want to find people who have been impacted by the Windrush scandal. So people who have been living in the UK and have gone back to their countries of origin and found that they couldn't come back. We want to find those people because they could be entitled to their status back, or they could be entitled to compensation. So what people in the diaspora can do to help is to talk about the issues around Windrush on public radio, in public, encourage people to come forward, encourage people to get in touch with the Windrush organisations here in the UK so that we can help them, or we can check whether or not they're entitled to have their status restored and entitled to have compensation. And if they then want to continue with helping us with the fight or with the burning work, they can, reach us through our website. They may have skills in education. They may have other skills that they want to work with us, use to help, other members of the community. But what we want to do is see if we can lift up our communities, not just here, but, where people came from as well. And so we want to reestablish those links links and have a national as well as an international network that's seeing how we can, as a people, lift ourselves up, but also hold the government accountable so that they can also contribute to raising us back up and putting us back to the position we would have been in had that racist law not been passed.
Yes,
Tonika,
Sandra,
thank
you.
Yeah.
I have 3 simple things that people can do. Yeah. Volunteer or donate to clinics today that's doing Windrush casework, please. Sponsor expert reports, because we know with expert reports, the awards that the claimants get will be higher. For example, the psychological harm, the trauma. How do you verbalize it enough to put it on paper without speaking to a psychiatrist or psychologist or a trauma support specialist? That's 1. 2, become an evidence buddy. We know the evidential burden is great on the claimant. A lot of people don't keep receipts from time. Some people do. But nonetheless, with the elders, help them to collect the documents, witness statements, timelines. And thirdly, encourage everyone to take legal advice early. We know that it helps make a significant difference to claims. There's a great cost barrier to taking legal advice, so find pro bono clinics. We're pro bono, and we encourage and try to get more legal practitioners to volunteer their time to help anyone affected. So if you need help, reach out to us, Liverpool Advocates, windrush.org. Again, free is better than cheap. So please help your community. It takes a community to raise a child, and it will take a community to make this right. Thank you, Sandra.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tonika and Anthony. That's our time today, but what a great conversation. We wish you so well and all the best with this very important fight. And, know for sure that you have access to our platform anytime to come and talk about, the progress that you're making and to any other way we can support you and the work that you're doing. But keep going. This is so important. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Hey, you. Thanks so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Also, visit face2faceafrica.com for your daily news and updates on what's going on within the global Black community so you can stay informed.